Hey everyone, welcome to another background building video. Well, kinda. This video I thought we could take a look at the 10 most important questions I think you need to ask before making your character for a campaign or story. Some of these will be very obvious, but others could be things you never considered. Future background building videos will be inspired by content and characters I create, but hopefully in the future will be driven by you guys, the community, so leave your suggestions below. For the creative writers out there, consider how making a character in your story can be affected by these same factors. Without further delay, 10 questions you should ask before making a character. Now, before we start with our questions, I'll preface that these are not all the questions you should ask, but I find they are the most important. Secondly, this should not be a checklist you go down one by one filling out. In many ways, when making a character, you need to consider several of these questions at once in order to be able to answer them. For example, saying you want to be able to run on walls and stab people with daggers in combat means you should definitely consider if your class you pick can actually do that, and the race you pick can maneuver the terrain you are in. Alright, so here we go. What race should you pick? This should fit your setting and your character's views. It's important to consider that if a campaign is well known for being mostly human, then your Dragonborn will definitely stick out like a sore thumb. Now, that could be your plan, but you need to consider the restraints this will also have. Your character will be much more watched, and rarely will they blend in. Thus, maybe that rogue might not be the best idea. What class should you be? Two things to consider here. Well, maybe three. What will you do out of combat, and what will you do in combat? These two things will shape the kind of class you pick, and will determine what abilities you will and will not want to have. Also, consider the setting you are in. If swords are hard to come by in the area and you want to play a battle master with huge swords and axes hanging all over him, people might naturally fear you and often keep their eye on you to see what you're up to. Same kind of thing can apply to druids or rangers who have animal companions. Often in a city game, this might be a bit out of place and you might have to find some workarounds in order to get your companion to travel with you. What archetype will you either build toward or take in building your character? This is a bit more important in games which span long durations. For those games, you want to consider how your character will grow. If you're considering a game where you start at level 1, you want to think, how will my character act, and what actions in the story will compel me to choose a specific archetype? What events might you need to set up with your DM or party to encourage this change? Sometimes you can also let the story decide this. While making plans can be good, adapting the story is even better. For me, in one of my games, for example, I was planning on being a bard. I went into the archetype College of Lore because I wanted to expand my knowledge and be a peacekeeper rather than a fighter. But as my party and I kept being bombarded and beaten up, I decided that my character would be inspired to follow the College of War and start trying to prevent his party from getting hurt by being this armored front line and quickly cutting down his foes to end the fights. In a one-shot, you'll be more concerned with how this can influence your backstory and your character's actions moving forward. Pick an archetype which makes sense for how your character will act and how he will approach situations such as fighting versus diplomacy. What background do you want to pick? So, as I've stated already, this is another part of building your character's background and story. No duh, the thing's called background, right? Terribly annoying if you ask me. But what you want to do is have a background that you have clearly given up, or are starting to try to follow. This will help cement your story and give others points to bounce off. Maybe you're an outlander and you have since moved into more of a city game and are trying to be citizen in the city. But maybe your party gets caught outside of the city in an adventure. You can now bring up this background to help catch food, set up camp, etc. It's a great point to both aid your companions and also have a bit of conversation over the way you got these skills and how you learned to do these types of things. So you want to break the mold. Is this going to cause an issue in the campaign? Hey, you do you is like my life motto. But when you doing you becomes a problem for someone else, that's when I take issue with it. The same applies for D&D. There's no issue playing a wild and wacky mold-breaking character unless the campaign or story will suffer from it. What I mean by this is that you have to consider whether this character is too out of place to even give the other players and DM anything to work off of. Part of playing this mold-breaking character is often to show off the things that make you different from expectations. As such, it's important that there is room to do that in the campaign. If a campaign has all its focus on combat, but you're that character that wants to show off how she can outwit others and talk themselves out of fights, well, maybe the dungeon crawl isn't the greatest place for this character. Does your character's backstory make sense for the level of this campaign? And follow up, being, how can you make it make sense? Yes, you knew we could not avoid my little level versus lore discussion. So as always with my golden rule, we simply make sure that the character's abilities and level match the experience of the campaign. A level 5 rogue probably could have pulled off some higher level crime, a low level assassination or two, but if you're the leader of the bandit horde in my city, I'm going to make your horde look like a bunch of incompetent beggar children. Now let's say you had Tyrone, the bandit lord, and you love running him in games. He's your favorite character, and you just have to play him. Okay, well, let's make sure you can play Tyrone. He is too strong and powerful to be a level 5 rogue that he has to be for this campaign. But we can fix that. One way to do that is exactly what I suggested I would do if I was your DM. Instead, if you approach the DM and say, hey, I love playing this bandit lord character Tyrone, but I understand that the position is way too high up for him to play in the campaign. How about we make it that I was only given the seat when my father died, and some of the order doesn't listen to my orders because I'm such a novice? If you approach your DM knowing the limitations, I'm sure they will be pleased to work with you. Giving them that open door to help is always better than rolling up and having the DM feel cruel by having to demean or lower your character's state of power to save the game's story. What do you want your character to do in combat? Simple, but important. Now, you may have a character who you are planning to smooth talk your way out of every single moment of fighting, but plan for failure. I know, I would make such a good motivational speaker, right? You need to know this answer because of two reasons. One, if you slow down combat because you made zero plans for the combat, it's going to ruin the hell out of your game. Two, it's important to know what you can do in combat that will still fit your character's backstory. Don't be the pacifist who sits on the side of the road waiting for combat to end. But at the same time, you don't have to be the guy slitting people's throats. Maybe you go do the puzzles during the combat, or you bring the party some kind of items they need while they guard you and fight the monsters. Maybe you evacuate the townspeople or get the city guard. And if you have to fight, no one says you have to kill. I mean, look at Batman. Planning for this allows you to take sleep and other controlling spells, rather than fumbling through your non-combat spells, trying to make them more in combat. These things are a great way to be a non-fighter, but still be part of the party when the initiative rolls get tumbling. What do you want your character to be known for in role-playing moments? Okay, so maybe you are that guy who's always combat focused. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's part of the game that you have the least room of error for. Party kills happen when role players forget to plan for combat. I mean, right? But even if you are all about planning for the combat, think what your character is like when there isn't combat. While being the guy who's always searching for a fight can be a role-playing attitude, often I find it doesn't mesh well with a party who enjoys a bit of role-playing here and there. Strong silent types on the other end of this not doing anything in role-playing attitude, and while it can be done well, it also lacks the flavor that a little backstory can provide. So one thing I suggest when considering this aspect is that you create 2 to 3 things your character will react to if role-playing. For example, be that strong silent type, but whenever there is a child being abused or a slave being beaten, maybe your character reacts and is either aggressive about it and talks about it later with his comrades in the regrets that he did not stop it. Putting these small additional things into your character can make your story just that much better. How does this campaign fit into your character's story? We talk a lot about how your character's story is not just the game you're playing in. Often you have your beginning or backstory, and then you have the middle life where you play in campaigns and one-shots, and then you have the end where the character dies or retires. So one question which is important to consider is how this campaign fits with that story. Is this your character's first adventure, and they have the experience from their past, but they're a bit green when it comes to doing things with a group? Or is this your character's last adventure? Maybe you have to plan for an event to happen which causes this to be his last adventure. This may be something you wait for or you talk to the DM to try to figure out ahead of time. How will your character enter this campaign? The do's and don'ts. Supposedly, you're all coming to meet in this campaign by different means. Unless you planned out some kind of backstories which are shared with other players, this means you have to introduce yourself and make a logical reason for your character to be there. This can be as simple as, I was looking for money, to, all my life I've been seeking the great staff of Felfomorn, and this adventure was sure to lead me to it. A couple pointers for this question follow. The do's. Plan with your group. Maybe your group doesn't have a session 0, but you can still talk to the DM and the other players before your first game. Plan to have stories which meet up and have it established that you know someone before arriving. This can help the role playing and it helps make a story more believable as you pull off each other's backstories to weave a more intricate timeline. Change your backstory to fit the story. You don't have to change everything, but make there be a reasonable connection for your character in this adventure. No one writes their backstory knowing what kind of games they're going to play in, but when you do find a game to play in, modify some things. Maybe you were a trader in a market, but now your adventure is on the sea. So you say that you also make trips to acquire the products you sell in your market. And similar changes to that can kind of help ease you into this story. The don'ts. Don't make the DM change his story. Don't say that something is some way because you want your character to have that be the reality. Because while a DM might work with you, it can also give them a negative correlation between your story and theirs, and this eventually could cause some game issues. Demand that you get to play whatever you want. A DM sometimes likes to restrict some things in their story to provide a certain perspective or limit to what can occur. While I discourage this idea, I also defend those who want to keep their story as it is. Sometimes there can be real reasons to deny certain requests, and as a player, you need to be willing to work around them. In a campaign where giants and their kin are seen as monsters and killed on sight, maybe there's no possible way for you to play that Goliath character, so you're going to have to adapt to that DM restriction. I, of course, could always talk more on this topic, and maybe the list could be 50 items long. But for now, these are the 10 things you'll want to ask before making a character. Hopefully this unusual background building session was helpful, and if you liked what you saw, please share the channel and consider leaving a like. It really helps the channel grow. These background building sessions will be heavily influenced by the wants of the community, so please provide your suggestions and give feedbacks on things you'd like to see. StoryCourse aims to be the #1 channel for fostering creative storytelling and for finding inspiration to make your own stories come to life. Have a wonderful day, and please subscribe if you want to see more content. Thank you, and go build, my little worker bees.